I'll have to do my own dirty work and blend those beans. So funny.
Chapter 36. While Smart's team was setting up at the seaside resort, Cabron was planning his own surprise party. Their stealth dropship touched its skids down barely long enough for the commandos to rush out the back ramp, then the Dragon dusted off, which was both a problem and a solution. The barren island where Fabron first stepped onto that planet was literally a desert. Nothing but sand, flat expanses of crumbling shale, and a few low-growing, hardy shrubs. The sand was the issue. Though the Dragon set down on a tilted slab of shale, its jets had scoured grit out of all the crevices and blasted 4 distinctive patterns of jet wash into the soft sand beyond. Any pilot coming in to set down would be suspicious of the clean slab of rock and would recognize the jet wash. The other problem was the deep footprints that Fabron's team had dug into the sand. So the Dragon loitered overhead while the ground team hid themselves. Then the dropship roared over the island in the same direction as the prevailing winds. Once, twice, 3 times the Dragon flew over at 30 meters until the footprints were buried, the jet wash erased, and every crevice and pocket of the shale was filled in with sand. Scorpion Lead, the pilot called to Fabron on the We'll be in the cheap seats, Fabron replied. Do not get a nosebleed, Dragon. We overheard the confirmation that Fabron's team was in position, and I told Skippy to do his thing. The second set of storks was over the ocean to the west-northwest of Fabron. They would pass by north of him by about 40 kilometers, unless we gave them a very good reason to change course. Okay, Joe. The check engine light of the lead stork just lit up. Those pilots will be looking for a place to land soon. I hope so. You hope so? Why would they not land immediately? Listen, Skippy, not everyone pays attention to warning lights. My Uncle Edgar's truck had a check engine light on for like 40,000 miles. He stuck a piece of black tape over the light and only brought it in for service when he needed new tires. Our Uncle Edgar is a true knucklehead? Yeah, that's what my father says. The other issue is those pilots know what a piece of crap they are flying. They might think the sensor is the thing that's busted, and it's giving them a false warning. Skippy was frustrated. Well, damn it. We have to hope there is a smart lizard flying that thing. Unfortunately, the 2 lizards flying that stork were not smart. They did not even signal the other aircraft that they had a potential problem. Skippy was exasperated. Shouldn't they even tell someone they might have an issue? Don't any of these lizards follow procedure? They are following procedure. The rules are aviate, navigate, then communicate. Keep the thing in the air with the greasy side down, then watch where you are flying. Only after you've got that under control do you start worrying about talking to the outside. Greasy side? What? The bottom. The bottom of the aircraft is where all the hydraulic fluids and lubricants and fuel drip out and make it greasy, I explained. That's the side you want pointed toward the ground, you know? Oh, got it. Hey, you actually did learn something from taking flying lessons. What are we going to do about these idiots? They are not turning toward the island, damn it. Instead of an idiot light, they need a big fist that comes out of the console and pops them in the face with an alarm that blares, "Hey, stupid, you have a problem." Like I said, warning lights are easy to ignore. And you glitched their fuel flow to get their attention? He did that. It got their attention. Whoa! Skippy chuckled. That did it. They have declared an emergency and are diverting to the island. Showtime, I muttered to myself as I called up sensor feeds from the commando team and from the Dragon that was circling the island at 25,000 meters. Commandant Fabron was also getting a feed from the Dragon, from the Skippytel network, and from each one of his team. To provide a grunt's-eye view, the commandos had scattered a half-dozen insect-sized cameras around the likely landing zone. The plan we had thrown together was solid, with only a few potential wrinkles. The slab of shale that Fabron's Dragon had used to set down was the most likely place for the pair of storks to land, but it was not the only possible place to land. Most of the island was covered in sand that blew and drifted with the trade winds. No pilot would choose to set down in sand. The fine grit would obscure visibility during landing and takeoff, and the sand particles could actually get melted inside the hot engine turbines and stick to the fan blades. We were confident the storks would set down on an area with... out with a rock ledge just wide enough for a storm if the pilots were careful where they placed their skids. My hope was the two aircraft would set down side by side so the two crew could cooperate in repairs. Since having the storks neatly parked side by side would wrap things up neatly for us, I feared the universe would see this part of the operation as a grand opportunity to screw with Joe Bishop again. And, of course, that is exactly what happened. What we did not know before was that the pilots of the two ships did not like each other, and that the officer in charge of the flight was in the stork with the false check engine light. He did not want the knuckleheads in the other ship to blast his craft with sand while landing, so he directed the other pilots to land away from him. Crap. Fabron, we are going to Plan B for Bravo. You copy? I see it. Timing could be tricky. You have boots on the ground. It is your call, I assured him. The first stork came straight in, swinging around into the wind only at the last moment, and set down in the center of the rock slab. With the stork occupying the middle of the exposed rock, there was no space for a second ship to land without setting one skid into the soft sand, and no pilot wanted to risk their aircraft tilting over. The second aircraft was then committed to landing on the peninsula, where the rock might or might not be stable enough to hold the weight of a fully loaded stork. To test whether the rock might crumble under their ship, the two pilots touched down gingerly, turbines blasting the rock with hot exhaust and whipping up the waves on either side of the narrow spit of land. Gradually, they reduced thrust until the engines were idling, only cutting power completely after a few minutes without the rock slab shifting gave them confidence. From the cameras and the overhead view provided by the stealthy Dragon, I watched the side door of the first ship open. The two pilots step out, donning sun goggles and shading their eyes with their four-fingered hands. They wasted no time in ducking under their ship and popping open access hatches, but they couldn't get to the problem component until the turbine on that side cooled down. That was part of our plan. The reason I asked Skippy to glitch the fuel flow was that valve was difficult to access and impossible to service when the turbine was hot. Making the lizards wait gave us time to look for the perfect opportunity to strike. After a minute, the pilots called a guard to help them set up a portable cooling fan to bring the turbine temperature down faster. We heard the two guards protesting before the lead pilot snapped at them to stop their nonsense and follow orders. One guard being assigned to grunt work, the other guard stood in the open doorway to take advantage of the breeze while he covered the humans in the cabin with his shotgun-like weapon. That was the moment we had been waiting for. All four lizards were exposed, except the three on the ground kept ducking around landing struts and walking under the stork's belly, and generally unintentionally obscuring the sightlines of the commandos. The asshole in the doorway wasn't standing still either. The sun on his back apparently was baking his skin, so he alternated between standing in the open door and ducking inside. It was very frustrating. What made it worse was that the lizards in the second stork were staying inside the aircraft where the auxiliary power unit was keeping the cabin nice and cool. That aircraft was flight-worthy, or as ready to fly as any poorly maintained old piece of junk flown by the Christine could be. After the engines were shut down, the side door opened, and we hoped the lizards would step outside to get fresh air, or inspect the aircraft, or swim in the freaking ocean, or just stare at the water. They didn't do any of that. Instead, they forced their human passengers out into the hot tropical sun. The first view we had of the kidnapped people was a man and a woman staring out the doorway, blinking from the sunlight reflecting off the water. The ground-level camera angle was less than optimal. All I could see was brownish skin, dark wavy hair, and a beard that was running the salt and pepper. The woman had her head wrapped in a sort of scarf. At a glance, I guess she was Asian. It was hard to tell, and didn't matter anyway. The man hesitated a moment, one hand on the woman's shoulder. Then he stumbled down the steps like he had been shoved from behind. No, he had been kicked. We got a glimpse of a lizard boot hitting the back of the woman's knee. Her legs buckled and she fell awkwardly into the man's arms. Except he wasn't able to hold on to her, and they both fell hard onto the rock. Rolling to their knees, they both had blood running from cuts on their hands, and the man was bleeding from his forehead. "Stay frosty," I whispered over the commando channel, though the words were intended for myself. More people stumbled or tumbled out the door. Adults at first, and then children. They were all skinny and sunburned, and their clothing was dirty rags patched together from previous items. One woman wore a shirt made from what looked like pant legs roughly sewn together with twine. Maybe it was spun from some native plant. Skippy interrupted my thoughts. "Joe, I'm listening to the crew of that stork. They are throwing all the humans out because the smell in the cabin is awful. The crew intends to lock them outside until they are ready to take off again." There is no fresh water on that island. I gritted my teeth. As I said that, children began to file out the doorway. The first was a girl about 10 years old. She might have been older. It was hard to tell, because hunger could have stunted her growth. That girl didn't fall out the door. She was kicked, and not gently. The boot must have struck her in the small of her back. She suddenly jerked forward and spilled out onto the rock, her fall only partly broken by an adult catching one arm. For one brief moment, the girl unknowingly stared directly into a camera. Limp hair hung down over her face, obscuring one eye. The other eye stared, unblinking. I know that stare. In the Army, we call that the 1,000-yard stare. The phrase originated in World War II, I think. People get it when they have seen so much horror. They are emotionally detached from life. It is a coping mechanism, dissociating from trauma. Through the camera, in that split second, she was looking at me. She wasn't pleading for help. She was beyond that. Help wasn't coming. She wasn't even enduring, not living. She existed. That's all she knew. No one is supposed to endure like that. Little girls are not supposed to have that stare. But bro, I toggled to the private command channel. In case you don't know this, the Geneva Convention does not apply out here. I want all those lizards dead. Babrone's reply was simply 2 clicks of the transmitter. He understood my message and didn't want to break focus to speak with me. I should not have bothered him. He knew the rules of engagement. We were not leaving witnesses behind. After the last of humans were roughly shoved or kicked out of the cabin, the door closed most of the way, staying open only a crack. Dazed and demoralized, the prisoners shuffled resignedly under the only shade available, the wings of the storm. 4 of them huddled together were blocking the best camera angle, so I switched to the overhead view. Fabron called me. Colonel, we can't hit this second aircraft without killing the people outside. My team does not have a shot. Frustration was evident in his voice. I would appreciate any suggestion you might have. Understood. Stand by 1. What the hell could we do? The 4 lizards were relaxing in the cool cabin, maybe taking a freaking nap. What I wanted to do was knock on the door, claiming I was delivering pizza. Scratching my chin with the thumb, I mulled over an idea that might actually be useful. Skippy, there are a couple things I've learned about flying. Keep the greasy side down, he guessed. That too. But also that you can trade altitude for airspeed and airspeed for altitude. It's okay to be flying slow if you have enough airspace under your belly. You can dip the nose down to regain airspeed. That makes sense. Why are you telling me this? It is not trivia night, Joe. I'm telling you because there is one situation when having plenty of altitude is not a good thing. When is that? When you're on fire. If you can't eject, you want to set down ASAP. Okay. Why do we care about that? Because at any altitude, fire in an aircraft is terrifying, Skippy. I believe it. Again, why are you telling me this? You are still connected to both storms? Yes. Currently, I am glitching the portable cooling card, so it will take longer for the pilots of the first aircraft to get access to the turbine. Great. I want you to cause a fire in the cabin of the second aircraft. Oh! I get it. Great idea, Joe. I can't actually cause a fire, but I can short out wiring and fill the cabin with smoke. Do it. Activating the transmitter, I called the commando leader. Fabron, those lizards will be coming out of the second aircraft soon. Be aware there will be smoke in the cabin. Our rifle scopes will not have a problem with smoke, he assured me. From there, it was all up to Fabron's commandos. He needed to find a moment in time when his people had clear shots at all 8 lizards. I worried that when the lizards ran out of the second aircraft, the humans there would also scatter instinctively to get away when they saw smoke pouring out the door. If they milled around aimlessly, they could block sight lines and screw up the entire operation. Oh, thank God. When the 4 lizards fumbled down the steps of the second aircraft, gasping and choking from inhaling smoke, the humans ran the other way. We had 4 lizards on one side of the smoking stork, and the prisoners running and looking for cover on the other side. The camera view was intermittently obscured by people running in front of the lens. The commandos were being fed a synthetic composite view based on all camera angles. Now all we needed was for that one asshole to stick his stupid freaking head out the doorway of the first aircraft. We waited. And waited. And waited. The sun had climbed overhead, so it was no longer shining in the doorway of the first storm, so that asshole should have been hanging out enjoying the breeze. Instead, he was unseen in the cabin, where we had no view of where he was or what he was doing. He could have been camped out on a seat playing games on his phone for all we knew. Hey, Joe, Skippy interrupted my thoughts. I don't want to make this waiting worse for you, but that lizard who is alone inside the cabin, he was reprimanded 3 times during the flight for abusing the prisoners. Oh, hell. He was beating children and taunting the adults so they would fight back. He wanted an excuse to kill. I hate to think what he is doing in there alone, and the camera in there isn't working. I don't have a view. Shit. Can any of Fabron's team get to that door before the lizard inside could react? No, I don't think so. Joe, that lizard has grenades. He could kill everyone. Okay. Okay, we need to get this shit over with quick. I debated doing the burning wire thing to the first aircraft, but humans might run out first and get in the way. We need to get their attention. Can you make more smoke? There aren't many flammable materials inside the storm. I'm doing the best I can. The fire is almost out already. Slapping my forehead, I reprimanded myself. We didn't need more smoke. The crew of the first aircraft had not noticed when smoke was pouring from the other ship. The wind was blowing the smoke out to sea. We didn't need to create another incident. All we needed was for the first crew to know about the smoke. The second ship's crew hadn't called for help yet. Probably they were hoping the fire suppression system could deal with the problem without them needing assistance. Skippy, make a distress call from the crew of the smoking stork. General call. Make sure everyone receives it. We saw immediate results. The three lizards working on the first aircraft stood up and looked to the north, finally noticing wispy tendrils of smoke. That still did us no good, until the jackass in the cabin stuck his head out to see what was going on. Execute, Padron ordered. Around the first aircraft, people in powered armor exploded up from under the layer of sand that had concealed them. Having received targeting data to their visors and rifle scopes while they were still buried in hot sand, they only needed to keep focus as they rose. Rounds were flying out of the rifle muzzles before the shooters had risen halfway to their knees. 1, 2, 3, 4 lizards jerked as they were double-tapped. 3 of them targeted by more than one operator, and so took multiple hits to the chest and head. It may have been for insurance, or it may have been for spite, but some of the bodies were rocked by additional bullet impacts as they were falling. After they fell, none of them moved. The asshole who was in the cabin got knocked backwards by the impacts, bounced off a seat in the cabin, and fell to sprawl on the steps, his booted feet still inside the cabin. To minimize the risk of collateral damage, the commandos had not selected explosive-tipped rounds, so I was a bit surprised to see the back of asshole's head had a big chunk missing. Then my attention was taken elsewhere. There wasn't any thick layer of sand close enough to the second strip, so the commandos there had to lay flat on the bottom of the ocean just offshore, relying on the chameleon wear of their mech suits for concealment. They had moments of anxiety when crab-like creatures crawled on and over them, worried not about being bitten through armored suits, but that a Kristang might have looked down into the water and wondered why a crab was crawling on something invisible. It was fortunate for us that none of the Kristang got out of their air-conditioned ship until they had to. And at that point, they were occupied by concern that their crappy ride home might explode. Fortunate for us, but it sucked for them. On hearing Fabron's execute order, the 4 commando operators leapt out of the water on powered legs, the bottom of their boots coming clear above the surface. Water fountained outward and cascaded down, sluicing off the hardshell suits and ignored by the operators. They would splash downward in seconds, possibly into awkwardly placed rocks or deeper pockets in the coral-like ridges that encircled the island. Trusting their suit computers to bring them to a soft landing, or at least not get them wedged into a crevice when they fell, the 4 focused all their attention on their designated targets. Last to shoot was United States Marine Corps Gunnery Sergeant Green, his initial targeting needing a fractional adjustment, so a bullet plunging through a lizard body did not continue on to hit a human in the background. Before Green splashed back down into the water over his head, he saw his target's head jerk backward and a red spray of blood, while his visor confirmed 3 other kills had been made. Ceasefire, Fabron ordered in a manner absolutely free of excitement as he rose free of the sand covering his suit. The task was complete. There was no need for anxiety. All targets terminated. Gunnery Sergeant Green splayed his hands outward to slow his plunge down through the water, assisted by an airbag inflating from his backpack. The suit's computer adjusted the pressure in the airbag so Green did not pop to the surface like a cork out of control. It gave him just enough buoyancy to cancel the weight of the hardshell suit. He waited a second for his rifle sling to retract the weapon over his shoulder out of the way and began swimming toward shore with smooth, powerful strokes. The suit had automatically engaged in swim assist mode, having been pre-programmed for that phase of the operation. Near shore, visibility under the surface was poor, the water clouded by churned-up sand and air bubbles from the crashing waves. He had to guess how close he was to touching bottom, until he remembered how to activate the sonar function of the sensors. The commando team simply hadn't enough time in Kristang armor, and the control menu and functionality was completely different from the skin suits he was used to. Digging his boots securely into the sandy bottom, he used his arms for balance until he was splashing ashore, waves washing only up to his waist. To his left, two operators just had the tops of their helmets emerging from beneath the waves. Green, one of the French operators called out. I joined the army to be a paratrooper, not a fish, no? Hey, Simon, I'm a Marine. Amphibious landings are what we do, Green answered with a laugh more hearty than warranted. It was nervous energy burning off, he knew. He was tempted to strike a pose and announce I have returned. But General MacArthur was an army feud, yet Green was a proud Marine. As he walked up the steep beach, slipping in the soft sand as his boots sank in halfway to his knees, he was able to see the parked aircraft, and beyond it, humans huddled in groups of 2 or 3. Half of them were fearful, ready to run, though not knowing where or why. The others stared numbly at him, having been drained of the ability to feel terror long ago. Oh, shit, Green breathed. Hey, guys, faceplate's open. Let them see we're not lizards. He went a step further, without orders, and against standing protocol in a potential combat situation. His suit had indicated all 4 lizards were thoroughly dead, and his own eyes could confirm that. The only threat in the area was that of frightening humans jumping into the water where waves might bash them against the jagged coral. Okay. Everything is okay. Have a spacecraft to take you up to a starship. The boy finally spoke. Green kneeled down and bent over so he didn't tower over the boy. Earth. We're going back to Earth. The boy looked up at Green, not blinking even in the brilliant sunlight. War is over. Cocking his head, the Marine heard the faint rumble of an approaching dropship. It's over for you. I promise. With the Stork parked on the only place to land on the peninsula, a dropship couldn't set down there. I thought of having Skippy remotely fly the Stork away and dump it in the water, but a dropship was still too big to land on that narrow ledge of rock anyway. The Stork lifted off. All the people there would need to be a safe distance away before applying takeoff power. If they were going to trudge through hot sand, they might as well walk to where Fabron's team was waiting. The Dragon crew rolled canteens of water and food ration bars and blankets and dropped them as best they could. One roll bounced and fell into the water. I watched as a French soldier waded out to retrieve it. When the water, food, and blankets were handed out, it surprised me that the people we rescued didn't fight over the sudden bounty. The adults drank from the canteens first and took tentative bites of the chewy ration bars, which pissed me off until I realized they were testing our gifts for poison. Gunnery Sergeant Green made a show of gulping water and gnawing off half a ration bar to assure the abductees they were in no danger. Whatever my very personal misgivings about Lamar Green being with us, I had to admit he was a stand-up guy. After the operators tossed the dead lizards into the ocean on the eastern side of the peninsula, where the current couldn't carry the bodies away, they led the still wary civilians toward Fabron. From the cameras, I could see Green and the others offering to carry the children, so they didn't have to march across the hot sand. But the young people would not go near them. We were running out of time. So when the commandos stopped to tear strips off the blankets and show the civilians how to wrap them around their bare feet, I was mentally urging them along, and I couldn't complain. If my boots had been on the ground, I would have done the same thing. That part of the operation was a success. 8 dead lizards, no humans killed or injured, and no alarm signal had gone out. Skippy remotely flew the first Stork to perform circles around the island, while the first Dragon landed and began taking people aboard. Congratulations to your team, Fabron, I called. It was outstanding. Ah, yes, it was. I had a recommendation, if I may. Lessons learned were usually held for the after-action report, but I didn't mind constructive criticism. Sure, tell me. All future teams should be equipped with an advanced piece of equipment. What is that?
Hello.
A beer can. I laughed. An asshole beer can? That is the best kind, no? The only kind, I'm afraid to say. Hey! Skippy protested. Colonel Bishop, Fabron called me, and this time his voice held none of the anxious tension. This time he was relieved that the operation had gone successfully. This time he was happy. I need to know something. Shoot. I mean, I needed to remember that not everyone understood American slang. Go ahead, Commandant. This operation went outstandingly well. The goods were delivered directly to us on schedule. Yeah. What's your question? Are we supposed to tip the delivery driver? No. We both laughed. Yeah, I have a tip for him. What is that, sir? Don't trust your check engine light. Chapter 37. Fabron's commandos having taken care of the Storks assigned to them, I turned my attention back to the other pair of aircraft, which were 60 kilometers from the seaside resort where Smythe and Kapoor were preparing a reception for the lizards. Skippy sighed. Joe, one of the lizard pilots is bitching about landing inside the compound. He says there is not enough clearance for a last-minute emergency go-around if necessary, that the landing zone violates safety regulations. He is right about that. I stared at the display. Since when did Kristang warriors care about safety regs? Tell him that landing in the compound is in order, damn it. I already did that, you numbskull. He is demanding to land at an alternate site over the hill inland. It is about 20 kilometers away. Shit. Okay, well, tell him we can't assure that alternate LZ is secure, and if he runs into trouble there and loses his passengers, it will be his responsibility. He was silent for a minute, presumably while he pretended to be the voice of the local commander and argued with the troublesome pilot. That did it, Joe. He insisted if there is a crash while landing in the compound that I take responsibility. Ha! Like that's ever going to happen. The warrior caste never accepts blame when something bad happens. The storks continue their descent, the second aircraft hanging back to give the first plenty of time to set down carefully inside the walled compound. The lead pilot was genuinely reluctant to land in the designated spot. He circled the compound 3 times, and I was growing worried he might see something that wasn't right. Finally, he skillfully hovered and lowered his aircraft with its tail tucked into a corner, leaving plenty of room for the second storm. So the second aircraft didn't have an opportunity to waste time. I asked Skippy to cause a power surge in one engine. Before he could do that, the pilots of that storm declared they actually were experiencing a problem, and they came right in without any delay. The aircraft set down in a cloud of dust, and once it settled on its landing skids and the turbine began to spool down, control of the operation passed to Smythe on the ground. Timing was going to be tricky. The first door kept its doors closed until the second aircraft's engine had powered down, and then for a decent interval to let the swirling dust in the compound be cleared by the constant breeze coming from the sea. During that time, it was reasonable that Smythe's team would be taking cover rather than standing out in the open. After that, the first storage door popped open, and one of the guards stepped out, squinting in the bright sunlight, looking around for the clan military team that was supposed to be there to provide security. At that point, Smythe could not keep his people concealed any longer, or the lizards aboard the aircraft would get suspicious. "Oh, you're up," the Star Team leader said quietly into his helmet microphone. Major Kapoor and another soldier stepped out on a balcony overlooking the compound's expansive courtyard. Because of the railing and the angle, it could not be seen from the courtyard below that the 2 mech-suited humans were standing on a platform to make them appear taller. Kapoor cradled the rifle in his right hand and waved with his left, using the Kristang gesture of keeping his palm facing toward himself. Through the translator, Smythe spoke. "Move the humans into the bunker quickly. Through the double doors and down the steps. Move. We are covering you, but you are exposed out there." The situation was odd, and the Kristang might have questioned the order coming from someone they didn't know, but the powered armor was a convincing display. Hard shell armor with faceplates down, set to opaque flat black, was a sign that trouble could be imminent, and that spurred the aircraft crews into moving. The side doors of both storks swung open wide, and guards stepped out, urging the humans out. "That's all 4 guards," Smythe muttered to himself. "Skippy, you have eyes inside both cockpits?" "Affirmative," the arsehole AI confirmed. "Targeting data has been transferred to sniper teams." At that moment, 4 icons on the left side of Smythe's visor lit up green, indicating the 4 snipers had solid locks on their targets. The 4 guards out in the open were not a problem. The 4 pilots in the cockpits of both aircraft were a problem. He waited a moment while a woman, a human woman, tumbled down the steps of the second stork, and for a moment, one guard was obscured behind a child as he clubbed the woman with the butt of his rifle. Stunned, she lay on the stones of the compound's courtyard, holding up a hand in a futile attempt to ward off her attacker. The lizard guard took a step forward to kick a woman, and Smythe saw the target was no longer obscured. "Tally-ho," he said in a calm and clear voice. The 4 guards jerked as they were struck by reduced power explosive-tipped rounds intended to minimize blood splatter while assuring the targets dropped instantly dead. Those ordinary Kristang rifles fired ordinary ammunition, and the people who operated the rifles were not designated as snipers. The people tagged as snipers used rifles that were modified only slightly to fire a special guided round that was no longer than standard ammunition. With the 4 pilots inside the aircraft and the windows tuned to black to keep out the hot sunlight, the snipers could not actually see their designated targets, not even with it.
I have vital information to the Hillary Clinton trial.
I want to smoke a cigarette. She's watching Little Mermaid.
Okay.
She's laying down. She's awake.
Alright. I'm listening to an audiobook, actually. I'm listening to Valkyrie by Craig Allen.
Hey, how does a fish make sure of instruments in key? What tune is it?
Shit.
I love the text-to-speech thing. Cracked is all you want for a rematch. I'm going to still beat you. This is the final level of MR Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine.
You think though?
Back to work, later buddy, emoji victory hand, emoji blue heart.
Who conveniently had a view by hacking into flight recorder cameras on the rear bulkhead of each cockpit. To hit those particular targets, each rifle fired a pair of rounds with a single gentle pressure on the trigger. The first round had a shaped charge tip, designed to burn a hole clear through from the outer skin of the aircraft to the inner liner of the cockpit. Those first rounds flew a subsonic curving path designed to avoid the tough structural frames of the aircraft and clear a hole in a thin part of the stork's skin. The 4 lead rounds did their jobs flawlessly. The pilots were stunned by the sudden surge of air pressure as the ammunition punched through the fuselage. Following only 12 meters behind, and also moving at subsonic speed, the second round from each rifle flew the same curving path and found a clear hole where tough composite skin used to be. All 4 rounds struck their targets and mushroomed, the soft noses of the ammunition flattening and pieces falling off to cause additional damage. 4 pilots were hit, and 4 pilots ceased to exist, their bodies torn apart by kinetic energy. Only 1 fragment went all the way through a pilot and out the other side to splat against a console, where it bounced off to harmlessly rattle to a stop on the floor. 4 kills, Skippy announced without his usual boastfulness. No collateral damage in the cockpit. The aircraft are operational. Thank you for the assist. Smythe knew that feeding the AI's ego was always a good idea. Team, move in. Captain Frey kept driving the truck through rain that alternated between a steady drizzle to sudden downpours until they were 8 kilometers from the hospital. Katie, Skippy whispered in her ear while she was trying to maneuver the awkward vehicle across a low spot in the road. The culvert under the road had become clogged with debris, causing the stream to back up and flow half a foot deep across the road. The water itself was not a problem. She was worried the rushing water might have undermined the roadway. When the AI called, she had slowed and was about to send Durand out to test whether the road would hold the truck's weight. This is Captain Frey, please. She clenched her teeth and let the truck coast to a halt, its wheels sticking in the mud. Joking around with Skippy aboard the ship was tolerable. Sometimes it could even be fun. And like every one of the pirates, she didn't really have a choice. Skippy so constantly sought and demanded attention, it was impossible to ignore him. But inappropriate familiarity during a potential combat situation was unacceptable. Sorry. He sounded more hurt than apologetic. What is it? She demanded. You had best ditch the truck. There is a cluster of buildings about 2 kilometers ahead of you. I am not seeing any heat signatures or lights, but sensor coverage of the area is spotty. Sorry about that. The road ahead goes through the town before you get to the hospital. It is mostly abandoned. However, there have been reports of lizards who refused to go when the area was evacuated. A patrol scouted the town before the hospital was reopened. They saw signs of recent habitation. Nothing to worry about. Nothing for them to worry about. We can't risk being seen. Do you have sensor coverage inside the hospital? Partially. Again, I'm sorry. There just isn't much for me to work with down there, and the satellite network is an obsolete piece of junk. The good news is I found a route up a back stairway and through a corridor in a section of the hospital building that was condemned. It will bring you within 20 meters of the isolation rooms where the 3 humans are being kept. You can we go back a bit? What do you mean condemned? That part of the structure is considered unsound. There was an earthquake about... maybe the term should be groundquake. Although, of course, the ground was shaking. If the air was shaking, you would just call it wind. There should be a word for... To her right, Durand was staring at her with increasing alarm at the AI's absent-minded babbling. Skippy, Frey interrupted. Get to the point. The building structure is unsound. Oh, sure. I got distracted. There's a lot going on, as you know. I'm currently talking with Smythe, Fabron, Joe, Sims, Chang, and Agatha. Plus, I am intercepting all... Talk to me. Okay. The groundquake cracked that part of the building, and it wasn't repaired. They put up signs and locked some of the doors after 2 lizard boys were playing around in there and got injured when part of the ceiling fell on them. She took a calming breath and nodded to Durand. The nod was intended to mean this is nothing unusual. How are we supposed to use the condemned part of the building? By being careful. Skippy, we are wearing mech suits. They are heavy. Oh, good point. In that case, you should be very careful. The bug says it's marginal, Frey whispered instinctively. Though sealed up in the powered armor suit, she could have shouted and no one outside would have heard her. The bug she referred to as a scout drone, a bit of Theranin technology enhanced by Skippy. Guided by her eye movements as tracked by her suit's visor, she had sent the little machine to crawl along the route Skippy had suggested. Immediately after the bug entered the building, she had seen a problem. The ceiling there was collapsed in piles of rubble because the whole second floor above had fallen in. Twice, she had to direct the bug to backtrack until it found a route up where they needed to go. The little machine had scanned the floor and found cracks both large and small. She was more concerned about the small cracks that were hard to see. There are weak spots in the floor we will need to avoid. Coordinates have been sent to your suits. Skippy? Gruzian asked as he crouched in overgrown bushes at the edge of the forest 50 meters from the back door of the hospital building. The rain had slackened to a fitful drizzle, stirred by gusty winds. Within 6 minutes, Skippy predicted, another downpour would sweep over the area, providing cover for them to race across the open area between the tree line and the nearest wall of the building. Across that 50 meters was a muddy drainage ditch, a roadway that was cracked with patches of grass seeking sunlight, and then a swath of weeds and neglected shrubs that grew 1 or 2 meters high. Their objective was a broken window rather than a door. The door, even if not locked, could make noise when they opened it, and the door frame might be bent. The window they had selected as their entry point had a bent frame with half the composite glass missing. In their powered armor, it would be easy to bend the frame out of the way and gain entry. That window led to the ground floor that should be relatively stable, even for people in heavy mech suits. To rescue the humans, they had to climb to the 3rd floor, treading along surfaces that the scout drone had scanned and noted weak areas. Can you program our suits to walk precisely enough so we avoid stepping on any weak spots? I could do that, but it would be a bad idea. That floor is bound to shift while you're walking. You will need to use your suit sensors in active scan mode to avoid trouble. That did not sound like a particularly wise idea to Justin Gruzian. Will an active scan be detected? No, Skippy scoffed. The electrical equipment in that part of the hospital is so old and worn out, it is generating even noise that even I am having trouble getting an accurate picture of what's in there. We go one at a time, Frey declared. The structure close to the wall we need to breach is stable. We can gather there. I will take point, Duran volunteered. Negative. Frey did not take her eyes off the building. Something was moving around in the condemned portion. She had a brief moment of alarm before her thermal image resolved the blob into some type of local rodent. The animal scurried along a cable hanging from the broken ceiling, then out of sight. I want Gruzian up front. I weigh less than him, Durand insisted. Frey hesitated. That was true. Although in powered armor, the weight of the soldier inside was not a major difference. The real question was whether she trusted the commando who she had not served with before. She has a point now, Gruzian conceded. If my fat ass falls through the floor, this will be over before it starts. All right, Durant, you go first. Frey almost asked if the other woman remembered how to activate her suit scanner. If needed, Frey could turn on the device remotely. The heavy rain squall swept in as Skippy predicted, and the three darted in single file across the gap. Durand reached the broken window first and lifted the frame out of the way for the other two to squeeze through. Then she rolled in feet first. The floor was covered in the clear, broken ceramic material that had been the window, and she slipped before someone steadied her by grabbing an ankle. Durand, Frey whispered, go. With the synthetic vision of her visor, Camille Durand did not need to turn on her suit's external lights to see ahead of her. The weak spots found by the scout probe were highlighted. Stepping as gingerly as she could in the hardshell suit, she climbed stairs that were slick with mud, algae, and a local type of moss, plus some kind of yellowish goo dripping down from the ceiling. Halfway across the second floor, a crack widened in front of her, and she reached out to hold onto a piece of metal sticking out of a wall as the floor swayed. Her visor was flashing orange lights, then red. This is not going to work, she advised, while inching carefully backward, watching the crack in front of her grow wider. Durand. Frey was watching the sensor feed from the other woman's suit. The original weak spots were now joined by a crisscrossing patchwork of lines representing cracks. Come back down here. Looks like we'll need to go in through the front door. Captain Frey, Routian called from the south side of the ground floor. I might have found another way up. There is no other way to the third floor, Skippy insisted. You think I missed? You are not thinking like a monkey. He pointed above him where the second and third floors were missing, along with part of the building's roof. Rain dripped down on him, repelled by the field covering his faceplate. What? The AI laughed. You plan to fly? Yes. Routian patted the tool belt on the outside of his suit. Like Batman. Okay, Skippy admitted, when all three had used their nanofiber lines and belt winches to pull themselves silently up to the third floor where the structure was relatively stable. That was pretty clever. Sometimes you monkeys can be... What do you see in there? Frey ignored the AI's need for constant chatter. The 3 human prisoners. They are not in good condition. You should not expect any of them to walk far on their own. They're alone in the isolation room right now. In the sort of open office area beyond that door are 2 medical personnel. It looks like they're asleep. They haven't moved at all in the past 10 minutes. Plus the 2 security guards I told you about.